Welcome to episode 6 of the brutal truth about, or the hard truth about B2B e-commerce. I'm your co-host, Isaiah Bollinger. I have the brutal truth about sales in the back of my mind. That's another podcast. That's how I stole their name for our name, the hard truth.
Hi, and I'm Timothy Peterson. I'm a B2B and B2C e-commerce expert, I guess you would say, and currently I'm a client advocate for Trellis. Also, if folks are happy to listen in, and welcome to our podcast, I just want to mention our one of our sponsors, Punch Out To Go. They're a global B2B integration company specializing in connecting commerce business platforms with e-procurement, if you could say that 3 times fast, and ERP applications. And their iPaaS technology links businesses' applications to automate the flow of purchasing data. So thank you to Punch Out To Go as one of our great sponsors here on the hard truth about B2B e-commerce.
Thanks, Tim. And I'm excited to introduce our guest, Jeremy Rudolph from Celigo. Jeremy, we've been working together for a little while now, and you've got, over a decade of experience in the technology space. Obviously now with a integration company, Celigo, but going before that, doing other kinds of integrations and logistics. So quite a bit of like SaaS experience, technology experience. I'm sure you've worked with all sorts of different retailers, B2B companies, manufacturers, distributors, everything across the board. So yeah, well, thanks for being here. Want to hear more about what you're all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Isaiah and Tim. Really appreciate the opportunity. Number one, to be a part of this podcast, and also just want to mention, if you're not tuning in live on video, you'll notice my background is Black here. Definitely wanted to support the Black Lives Matter movement that we have going on right now in our country, and just make sure that I'm making my statement and doing my part. So just a little bit about me. I've been in Silicon Valley software for a little over the last decade, designing, developing, deploying, and operationalizing software as a service and cloud architecture solutions for every type of business. So anything from SMB to mid-market to enterprise. So I've worked with companies such as Joe Smith in his garage selling widgets, e-commerce, all the way up to companies the size of Walmart, Alcatel Wireless, Tencent, Centrica Connected Home, and everything in between. My main focus has been on the sales side. I've worked with multiple folks on different teams cross-functionally coordinating across different departments, and I've essentially been able to bring together some of the brightest minds in commerce, but also put together some structures within not only e-commerce, omni-channel, in B2B, but also within the supply chain. So I'm really excited to be here today. Really appreciate, again, the opportunity, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is going to be really, really good for people out there. And the reason that we've done this is to try and remove the hidden secrets of B2B e-commerce. B2B, we feel like it's just so much more complex than B2C. I mean, a lot of B2C companies are getting away with the simplicity of, spin up Shopify, do some Facebook ads, and all of a sudden they're making millions of dollars. Obviously, it's not that simple, but you know what I mean? Like it's a little bit easier to execute technically than it is in B2B. With B2B, and the reason that we actually, even know you guys is, Trellis was doing a lot of integrations for B2C and B2B, but in B2B, we found that integrations were just like the backbone, because these companies typically have an ERP system, right? Like most companies in B2B have NetSuite. I know you guys, have a strong NetSuite background, whatever, Infor, SAP. I mean, we can name all the ERPs. They have an ERP that's like basically powering their company. And obviously there's a lot more infrastructure, but that seems to be like the core, like central piece of most of these B2B companies. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh crap, we got to do e-commerce. And our e-commerce system is not the same as NetSuite. And, you know, some people might use SuiteCommerce, but typically it's like NetSuite and Magento or NetSuite and Shopify, or, you know, something. I'm using that as an example, but some sort of two different systems. And hence Celigo, and that's kind of where you guys are born, is bridging that gap. So I want to talk about, like, why do you think it's so hard? And obviously, you know, you guys are trying to make it easier, but generally I think it's been historically hard for companies to overcome this integration hurdle. And I think there's lots of reasons for that. But what I want to hear from you, kind of, why do you think it's been so hard for companies over the last, you know, let's call it the last 5 years?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways that we can look at it. So I'm going to take some of the things that you said, and I'm going to probably mix in a few of the things I know here. So in terms of we can talk about all different sizes and shapes of companies. So I want to make sure that this is relevant to every type of company that's out there, not just large, not just small, but you know, everybody in between as well. So oftentimes when a company starts, Joe Smith in Kentucky selling widgets out of his garage, he may just be starting with, let's just use Shopify or Magento as an example, a simple e-commerce website. Shopify has made it very simple to spin up a website, I think overnight now, with basic templates. But essentially what you can do there is turn on a store, sell those widgets out of your garage, and be up and running. Now, great, but what happens when your business starts to take off? What happens when, e-commerce? Let's just use the e-commerce case for a minute. We're not talking about B2B yet, but we're looking at product it's either a trend. I call it the pet rock trend. Or it's now, like in the times of COVID-19, it's an essential good. So I'm selling toilet paper on my website, and all of a sudden everybody's wanting to buy it, right? So it's very quick to market, and it gets a lot of traction. Now, with that, simultaneously, you're trying to figure out multiple things within your business. So you're not just looking at, how do I produce my product fast enough at the supply level, and how do I make sure that I have my supply chain infrastructure built out properly? How do I make I'm also thinking about, how do I make decisions on, do I ship this air or do I ship this overseas? So especially right now, there's a huge cost differential for that. Historically, the margins on products that are shipped by air are very high. So we're talking electronics and pharmaceuticals. Mm-hmm. However, we're seeing a lot, just industry wide, the air rates right now are 4 to 6 times greater. And there's a lot of folks that have kind of, I'm going to just say, struck gold in a good position that are using those air rates, even though they may be giving up on margin to satisfy the demands of their customers. Now, at the same time, to keep it on point here, at the same time, there's also potential retailers reaching out to Joe in his garage. Joe's trying to figure out, how do I even work with these retailers, right? Like, they just sent me a bunch of documents, and I don't, I just signed a deal with them. They just sent me a bunch of documents. I don't know what to do with them. I have to send products to their facilities. I have to integrate with some system I've never heard of. I don't know anything about integration. And at the same time, I'm looking at, I can't fulfill my product anymore because my garage isn't working. So now I'm in a 3PL scenario, or 3PL situation, or third-party logistics for the folks who don't know. So I'm using an outsourced warehouse facility to do all of my shipping and pick pack of my goods. So it's there's a huge challenge for Joe, but not only for Joe, some of the larger companies as well, trying to figure out how do I keep, as my business is scaling very, very quickly, how do I keep a handle on all these different pieces that are moving at the same time, and hire the right people, build the right infrastructure in terms of my supply chain, build the right systems. And that pertains not only to the B2C piece, but the B2B piece is going to, generally be more complex and a lot more, and just a lot more difficult to get sorted out because the resources are not available today.
Gotcha. So you would say that part of it is just, it's just so there's so much complexity around all these different systems, and for the average B2B company, it's probably a little bit overwhelming when, retailer A, B, C, and D are like, hey, I need you got to integrate with my like legacy, whatever ERP, or here's our EDI documents or whatever. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, like we're not CTOs, we're not technical software engineer people. They're just kind of overwhelmed. So you think that there's just kind of like I guess, would you describe the challenge of these integrations as just like kind of like a lack of knowledge and kind of clients or companies being overwhelmed by the sheer number of potential complexities that they're facing? Or how would you describe that?
Yeah, I think it's not just that, but I think the way that B2B has been set up in retail specifically is it's archaic. Yep. We talk about EDI, electronic data interchange. It's not the oldest method out there like AS400, but it is it is a pretty old method of integrating, and there's specific rules and specific file types and specific documents that are traded across the board. And especially if if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm new to this space, it's usually I'm overwhelmed as an entrepreneur, and that's what I've seen throughout my history. I've worked with thousands of brands just throughout my career in the Valley here, and that's one piece. Now, every time somebody's going to work with a retailer or quote unquote trading partner, they're going to get a couple different things, and sometimes only when they ask. So one is they're going to get what are called retail compliance guidelines. So how to pack the product, how to label the product, how to send the product in, and they have to 100% make sure that it's set up properly. Otherwise, they're going to get what are called chargebacks, and it's a business for retailers. They make money off of it. It's probably one of the most well-kept secrets in the space. The other piece is so that goes really hand in hand, Isaiah, with what you were saying. Is the other piece is the technical requirements and ensuring that you have set up your business in a way where you're communicating appropriately with that retailer of, hey, when are the goods arriving? When are, have the goods been delivered? Am I going to be short shipping? Is there going to be things that are coming in that my supplier may have sent by mistake? So all of those things, if kind of in parallel to the to the product coming in, the systems have to be talking to each other, because if they're not talking to each other, at the end of the day, there could be chargebacks. 2, there's a lack of visibility, and 3, the biggest thing is you could get dropped by that retailer, which is the last thing that anybody wants.
Yeah,
right?
let me interject for a second, because I don't even know if Isaiah knows this, but I was a retail exec for years before I moved to e-commerce. So I was a boss at Old Navy, at Guess, at Bloomingdale's, at Macy's, a whole variety of places, and it was ridiculously complicated. I mean, I have to be really blunt about that. A lot of the things that we did were just astoundingly antiquated, even at the time I was doing it before I moved into e-commerce, right? It was just a very, very strange, way of approaching things. And it hasn't necessarily all gotten that much better, because I've worked with a lot of, e-commerce players on B2B and B2C side now in apparel, selling either wholesale or selling direct to consumer. And, the ones that are selling direct to consumer, it's like, whew, this is easier, right? And the ones that are selling wholesale to like Nordstrom or, others, there are still pieces of the puzzle that are very complicated for people, to figure out. And they need, folks like you in order to make that a lot easier.
Yeah, and Tim, from your experience, like when you were an exec on the retail side, were you seeing a lot of these processes, just I guess from the retail perspective, not even from the merchant perspective, but were you seeing a lot of these processes automated, or were they more done in a manual way? What did you see?
I was there really, well, my career goes pretty far back, but basically 80s into the 90s, and I left retail in 2000. So that long ago, but they were going through processes of automation, really moving away from like the faxing of things and the hand delivery of things and sort of those requirements. That was happening in the early years of me in that part of my career. And it was moving to an automation phase, but really the unfortunate thing is that it was still heavily siloed, way too late. So as they started, let's say a lot of these businesses had catalog divisions, for example. There was Macy's by mail or Bloomingdale's by mail. They would automate separately in those divisions. And then when e-commerce along, it was like, well, is that another division, or do we have it grow out of, the catalog division? And how do these things speak to each other? And so, it's one of the reasons that I've really spent a lot of time in transformation projects, over the years, because people really just didn't correct that stuff early enough or didn't get ahead of the game. So automation, sure, but then they automated in these very separate ways. So not very useful to the consumer, whoever it was. Right?
It's good to hear about the genesis and then the silos that, that you're talking about. And a lot of those silos kind of translate into where we see silos today. So that's awesome insight. Very powerful.
Yeah. And I still see those silos. So I just want to kind of bring it back to what iPaaS is. And it's kind of a newer technology. Like when I bring up iPaaS, I would say like very rarely does anyone know what I'm talking about.
We're losing this, Isaiah. You got to repeat it.
Sorry. Did I cut out for a second? Yeah. So
I
wanted to bring it back to iPaaS. Or integration platform as a service is, I guess, that's the correct term, right? iPaaS.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a newer technology, right? Like I think the average person doesn't really know what it is, and even probably the average company in B2B doesn't know what it is. And so what you guys are doing at Celigo as an iPaaS, like I want to kind of describe that for people. Like you're kind of sitting in the middle to try and simplify and bridge it. Like you can't obviously fix these legacy issues with other companies, but you're trying to help kind of like bridge the gap between all of these, different systems in a simpler way, kind of in the middle of everything that you could be integrating with, basically. But do you mind touching on that a little bit, Jeremy, and just kind of explain it for those who have no idea what iPaaS is?
Yeah, absolutely. And iPaaS is a new term, integration platform as a service, as Isaiah has mentioned. It's a quote unquote newer term. However, iPaaS has been around for a little while. It's just something that nobody really talked about until more recently, within the last couple of years, I'd say. Just because there wasn't as much reliance on cloud applications, and within the last, I'd say 5+ years, 5-ish years, businesses have grown from a very small handful of applications. I think the list is called the David's list. There's like tons of for applications and number of applications within a business, but essentially the number of applications on average per business has grown exponentially across the board. So what we tend to see with that within these businesses is that with those particular applications, data starts to become silo, and especially with with a platform like Celigo, what businesses are looking to do is they're looking to integrate applications across the value chain within their business. So they're evaluating, how do I integrate with my materials resource planning? How do I integrate with my product lifecycle management? How do I integrate with my ERP? So I think you mentioned something earlier, but like the source of truth system. So how do I make sure that I integrate with that source of truth system and ensure that at the same time I'm pleasing my finance team, that I'm also communicating with my customer service team if I'm the one who's procuring and selling the goods on the sales side, right? And I think that's really important, that all those departments are talking to each other. And today it's done really between a lot of data silos, manual processes, and spreadsheets. And there's a lot of room for error within that.
Yeah. And you guys are helping automate all that and basically getting people out of spreadsheets and into the cloud. And in theory,
so the plug, the Celigo plug is essentially to help automate applications across the value chain. So datas are in silos. How do we make sure that everything's talking to each other and that your business is running more efficient? So you potentially don't need to have to be hiring extra people to do a bunch of manual work. The ROI that we typically see is exponential. We just had a case study come out the other day for My Amigo, and My Amigo is a B2B customer. They're almost like wheelchairs, but they're like little motor scooters.
Yep. I know.
And I think they're solely B2B. Right. But how do you integrate all your systems? And what Ryan was saying at My Amigo is that he was getting 10x ROI on right after Celigo came in, on a project that he was sitting on for 2 years within his own internal IT department.
So, and I think that's a lot of what's happening in B2B. I think, B2B companies are reluctant. It's almost like they're scared to automate, because if they automate, they're like, oh, well, we're going to automate all these jobs away. Which is. Sorry, I don't want to laugh at that, but like, I think there's like a reluctance in some cases, because it is true, right? Like, would you, I'm sure that's a pushback you guys might get,
Partially, and I think if you're talking to an executive, like a CFO, C-level executive at a company, that may be the intent. But in terms of so I work with a lot of partners who are focused on utilization KPI, and a lot of times what ends up happening is that their people potentially get sucked into things that they shouldn't be working on, and what are not billable hours, right? And so
interesting.
How do you take those people off of the stuff that's basically causing noise, right? And then put them into the job that they're supposed to be doing. And that's, I think, is just kind of redirecting the resource into the right place versus cutting down on the number of employees you have. So that's another perspective.
Yeah, I love that perspective.
And I just want to add to that for a second. I mean, a lot of the analyses that I've seen of businesses, and it could be early stage, it could be mature, that are going through automations, is that you really do have to look at that org chart pretty carefully. And automations generally do not mean firing. It means repurposing. And often you're repurposing, and kind of shaking things up in a way that does focus on revenue or customers, as opposed to all of these tasks that were taking too much time, for people. And so really, it's something that's generally pretty positive for almost any business. So, we're not replacing. It's not like that dystopian idea of like robots coming in and taking every job away. It's a very different sort of thing in reality for most businesses.
Yeah, and I know that I'll keep this one short, but I know that the term digital transformation gets thrown around a lot,
Yep.
just in this space. But typically, what we see, just to define digital transformation, from what I've seen at least, is I see businesses evaluating efficiencies within to reduce the amount of time spent on tasks, like Tim said, that don't really need to be performed by a human, but are not that particular human's actual role. So that digital transformation is not just across a single application, it's across the entire business.
You
Yep.
got it.
Gotcha.
You got it.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, I know we're going to run out of time here, and I still have 4 topics that we want to cover. So let's keep moving. So yeah. Tim, did you want to get into the next one?
Yeah, one of my favorite topics, and you can answer this in any way you wish, but our listeners are always very interested in things like success and failure, right? I mean, it's just and it's not neither or, right? I mean, it's not neither or. It's like this business has only done successful things, and this one's only failed. But I think there are certain things that businesses do that help them be successful, and certain things that they have done that help, unfortunately, make them fail. So do you have any ideas there, particularly for B2B, commerce, that cause a business to fail, or, something that they're completely neglecting, or really make them winners?
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of my biggest pieces of advice across any business, entrepreneur, large business, small business, is fail fast. Because there is always, if you're not failing, you're not learning. Number one, in my opinion. But also number 2 is, if you're not failing fast, you're burning cash. So essentially, what do I mean by that? So let's just talk real quickly. I'll go into the lack of systems first, and then I'll talk about the supply chain infrastructure and what that means, just probably mostly from a fulfillment perspective, which is where most of my experience is.
Sure.
So the first is with the lack of systems. So a lot of businesses, and I was just talking to one today this morning that was taking spreadsheets out of Shopify and putting them into their warehouse, their fulfillment warehouse's warehouse management system, or WMS. And that's one of the inefficiencies we had talked about earlier, or a type of one of those efficiencies. But if you're doing that today, in my eyes, that's almost classified as a failure. And I'd say keep doing it until you get an automated process up and running, and take that data. Right now it's sitting in a silo, it's sitting in Shopify, or it's sitting in the WMS, right? And when the warehouse ships it, you got to put it back into Shopify so those customers get those emails, right? So if you can fail fast and figure out a way to get those 2 systems connected, you're very quickly you're immediately going to have efficiencies within your business, and you're going to be able to refocus your resources into the right things as an operational process. 100 orders didn't make it down to the warehouse today. What happened? My customer's not telling me that. It's more of, I'm being proactive in managing that through a system today, right? And how do I have that visibility in that error management? If you don't have the system in place to control it, it isn't there. The second piece, so that's just one use case, and I have a lot of them, but I'm going to keep it to one, just in the sake of time. The second one is just on the supply chain side. So it's hard to evaluate fulfillment, especially if you hadn't done it before. And most of the time for larger companies, they're going through an RFP type of process for that particular part of their business, because they have experience, they've done it before. But for the folks who don't have the experience, choosing a warehouse and being able to integrate quickly. So this is another piece of integration is number one, but also being able to pull out very quickly. So what I mean by failing fast in this scenario is you choose a warehouse for B2B commerce. That warehouse is mainly focused on B2C. They don't know how to move pallets. They don't know how to ship necessarily ship cases. They don't know how to move truckloads and schedule freight and do all of that stuff that is normal for a B2B facility. So it's ensuring, and simultaneously, you can flip it around, and a B2B warehouse may not know how to do B2C. So you may structure your fulfillment in a way where you're using one facility that specializes in B2C, one facility that specializes, or one company, I shouldn't limit it to a single facility, but one company that specializes in B2B, one company that specializes in B2C, that knows the business inside and out, that has done this before, that can almost be your advocate and be your partner versus just performing a service. And at the end of the day, like, hey, we're going to make money off this either way. Because the fulfillment center generally knows that they got you, because it's so hard and takes so long to get integrated with their system. With an iPaaS like Celigo's, you're very easily able to turn on and turn off a warehouse almost, I don't want to say overnight, but within a week or two. So it makes it very simple and easy.
So would you say it's fair to say that, touching, kind of like simplifying that success and failure is so complicated, right? But for just to kind of get people value here listening, that a big part of successful failure in B2B is integrations, kind of automating systems in a way that's smart, and there's a process behind it. Like, you guys do some error logging stuff. So something fails, you can see, like this API failed, or the data didn't get transferred over. So you know where the breakdown is. So kind of having a more sophisticated automation around that. And then also having some thought behind your logistics and fulfillment to handle, I almost like to forget B2C and B2B for a second, like almost like a variety of types of orders. You have like your large pallet truckload orders, and then you have your like smaller, maybe mid-size wholesale orders, and then you have your like one piece item, single item orders. So like being able to kind of have a process to fulfill all of that through e-commerce and all integrated together. Would you kind of agree that that's like a big part of success and failure? Like, I'm trying to really simplify it for people.
Yeah, no, thanks for doing that. Yeah, I would agree. So to even break it down further, very simplistic, have a plan for shipping to retailers, have a plan for shipping to whole retail stores, small retail stores. So they call them musical cartons, and then have a plan for shipping direct to the consumer, both in systems and the physical infrastructure. Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, this is super, super helpful. I think it's going to really help a lot of people here. Because a lot of times in e-commerce, we get so stuck on the flashy. That's why we wanted to do this podcast. People get stuck on the design and the flashy. What does the homepage look like? And it's like, none of that matters if you can't get the product out the door, right?
It's like, it's also 100%. And it's also like, how do I buy? Like, if I want to buy something online myself, I want to buy online and ship to store. But if you think about that, at the end of the day, what's happening with the supply chain? Like, the systems have to talk to each other, right? So if I'm buying online and shipping to store, do you have a way to aggregate all of those orders that are going to that particular store down in your fulfillment center and create one carton to go there to be the most cost efficient, right? Most likely the answer is no, because this is something that's so new with COVID-19 that a lot of businesses are trying to figure it out. I would say a handful of the big retailers have figured it out, but it is very, very costly if you don't get it right. Extremely, you could be spending a lot of money real quickly.
Yeah, and it's not just costly, of course. With directly with money, right? It's costly to your customers and your perception, because really what happens in a lot of these situations that I've investigated, because there are a few companies I've worked for trying to analyze that whole step-by-step process. seeing like how a customer reacts to something that you're doing or not doing. And, any piece of that puzzle that falls apart really hurts your ability to attract customers and to keep customers. So it's something that pays off in a lot of ways if you get it right.
Yeah, it's like enhancing the customer experience it means so much. It's such a loaded phrase, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so many things that have to happen behind the scenes in the plumbing to make it work right.
Absolutely.
So I was just going to ask one more question, and then I could throw it back to Isaiah. The only other question, again, this is just something I asked really all of our guests, is about it's that dichotomy of B2B, B2C, and what they learn from each other. And in my experience, or at least in, let's say, again, like the last 5 years, as Isaiah said, a lot of B2C was ahead of B2B for commerce, right? Just ahead in innovation and a lot of different things that were moving along. I'm just wondering if you agree with that, or what you would say you B2B players can still learn from B2C.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, thanks, Tim. Yeah, I think there's definitely room for companies, software companies, to to build applications for the B2B side, because those are missing right now. So if you look at quietly last year, Shopify acquired a B2B company called Handshake. I don't know if you guys are familiar.
Yeah, I've heard about it. No one knows what's going on now.
Yeah, exactly. But look, Handshake is one of a very small handful of companies. I think there's like, and there hasn't really been a company from a software perspective that's figured out an application. Most of the technology right now is being developed by agencies such as Trellis, for example, to get one piece of data to another place via a tool such as Celigo. And I think there's a huge opportunity in the space to build an application that can help salespeople who are going out, well, before COVID-19, who are going out and selling directly into the retail stores, which historically, like, literally people were going into the stores and like taking orders on it. Like, the more automated ones were doing it on an iPad via Handshake. But I think that, being able to launch or push into that system of, hey, there's an actual application here where you can just go in it. We set up some training for you and you're done. That makes it easy. So now you don't have to have necessarily, now it's more automated, right? You don't have to have that person on the floor. And I don't know if and there's two other systems. So Peppery, which is one that I'm not as familiar with. There's another one called TradeGecko, which is another B2B automation platform. But I think they're mostly for smaller brands.
Yeah, I've heard of them. Yep.
But I don't know if I'm answering your question, Tim.
That's okay. I think you're still providing great information for our listeners. So all good. All good.
Well, I think it's because it's complicated, right? Like B2B is just I think there's a lot to learn from B2C, from like a marketing and making it easy for your customers to buy. But like, I forget who it was. Actually, one of our guests, he has a funny story of a friend. He's been successful in B2B, like on the ground floor, working for distributors, doing B2B e-commerce. And he's like, I really had to get in the weeds and the ERP and all these things. And he said, one of his friends failed because he tried to do the B2C playbook, which is just the Shopify playbook. But it didn't work because the organization was like so different. Like they had so much more operational complexity. So I think there's a lot to learn from B2C, but you have to like kind of keep in mind that you can't just copy that one for one. You have to kind of like take it and, use, the B2B side as well, and, kind of combine them too, I guess is the way I would put it.
And what I would add too, and again, I'd be interested to hear just what you have to say on this, Jeremy, is I think a lot of innovation needs to happen so that more things can be done on mobile on the B2B side. That's
Yeah.
something that is definitely behind B2C. So no matter how it looks or how well it might function on a desktop, there's still some strange lag on moving to mobile that I think would really be helpful.
Yeah, I think one of the fastest, and it's more on the back end than on the front end, but one of the fastest growing or fastest disruptors in the space in terms of supply chain is Flexport. I don't know if you guys have heard of Flexport.
I've heard of them. Yeah.
They're a freight forwarding company that gives you full visibility from supplier to in bulk. So they from supplier to warehouse to the destination, and they have they have very flexible APIs and a nice UI, and they make it very, very simple for to manage your shipments. And I think where a lot of the breakdown occurs, because I work with a couple freight forwarders very closely in my past life, is that historically, especially in the freight forwarding, or if you're moving more than just a case of goods, you have to schedule. And so, like, what's going to disrupt next, I believe, at least in the B2B space, is going to be on-demand scheduling. And we're seeing it more and more with like the mattresses of the world, like white glove, in-home delivery, and being able to take out an old mattress and bring in a new one and set it up and all that stuff. But being able to schedule the LTL, the less than truckload or the truckload, or there's all sorts of scheduling that goes back and forth. Still, like Tim said, via fax machine. Believe it or not, it's still happening. It spreadsheets. None of this stuff it's ripe for disruption. Similar to banking, which is also starting to get into the new world. But I think one of the biggest innovators was Flexport. Flexport really Ryan at Flexport really took this from the very beginning by looking at, I think, shipping manifests, and was like, there's got to be an easier way to do. And he figured it out. So I think it's ripe for disruption, right? For change.
Yeah, and I think Flexport, you make a great point. It's one of those companies that the average person probably doesn't know too much about,
right.
But they're one of those behind the scenes B2B disruptors that could be the next big Uber type company. Speaking of Uber, and I think you're kind of alluding to, and actually I think our last guest actually brought up a similar point about what we thought the future of B2B e-commerce was. It wasn't exactly, but I think you guys it's like two similar points. And it's this kind of like, B2C, people want that on demand, right? Like once you got Uber and Lyft and like Amazon, it's like no one wants to wait anymore. Like all of a sudden you have these services where it's like click a button and it comes to you like in real time, and real time restaurant delivery. All this stuff is like so real time, and I think that's kind of what you're alluding to, is that could come towards B2B. Like B2B organizations, instead of having to buy, a 5,000 units because, I have to buy that every year because I make that 5,000 units last a year, and the next year I order another 5,000 units. It's like maybe this like bulk purchase. I want the 5,000, but I want, 100 every few weeks.
Yeah, like an open
delivered. Yeah, exactly. And I want it in real time. When I run out of my 100, the next 100 just automatically kind of re-ups and fulfills that demand. So,
and you guys probably know this, but one of the things that's interesting just about again, B2B, B2C kind of flip is a company like Home Depot that has the B2C side and then has the whole commercial division. They are treating those very similarly now. So you can get deliveries of almost any stuff you can get from them to a specific hour, and you may have to pay more for it. For that delivery, maybe it's $79 or something for a commercial order, but you can get it. You can say, I want it from 12 to 1 p.m. on a Tuesday, and it'll come. And, so those types of innovations are remarkable, because they were not possible at all for most business players ordering pipe and wood and all this sort of stuff. It just wasn't possible. Now you can. and so that really kind of raises the bar for a lot of other businesses.
And I think that's why we're doing that. Sorry, I just want to touch on the goal of this. There's obviously the Home Depots, the Walmart, and the Amazons of the world. I don't think they need the help that we're trying. Like they might. I'm sure they need help, and they're going to innovate. But I think we're trying to get people informed that are those smaller, mid-size, and even lower enterprise companies, so that they can kind of catch up and not kind of die out.
And I still think it's important to bring them up, because they're the pioneers of the inefficiencies in the B2B space, right? And that's how everybody is kind of still working today. And there's a lot of work to do, but again, with a partnership like with Trellis, with Celigo, there's a handful of other companies out there. If you're able to get those systems right, it really brings that whole picture together, and makes life a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. So that you can compete. We were talking about dystopia for a second with automation. We don't want to all be working for Walmart, Home Depot, and Amazon, right?
I don't think so. Yeah.
Like 5 companies going to rule the world. Great. This was awesome. I really, really appreciate all this insight. I just kind of want to wrap up here, because we're probably over the 45 minutes that we're trying to achieve. So I want everyone to kind of stay tuned, keep listening in, to come back for episode 7. We have Lone, who's actually working for an international agency. So kind of bring the agency experience, trying to kind of get the different types of experience and minds together. So we're going to talk more about the like project problems, agency problems, because every company has that experience of working with an agency, and it may go good or bad. So thanks so much, Jeremy. Any last remarks, anything you want to kind of wrap up with while we close up?
No, I think we covered it pretty well. I guess I would just say, again, fail fast. If you're doing something that is where you're burning a lot of cash, figure out where the holes are and figure out how to plug them quickly.
Awesome. And then how can people find you? Because you're a great resource. How do you like to get?
They can find me directly through Trellis, or Jeremy, Jeremy .Rudolph, RUDOLPH @Celigo, CELIGO.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jeremy.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.